Imagine grinding grain by hand for 12 hours just to make one loaf of bread. Medieval peasants faced this nightmare daily until one invention changed everything. A machine that captured invisible wind and turned it into village-powering energy that fed hundreds. The daily struggle for bread. Before windmills, making bread was torture. Families spent entire days grinding wheat with heavy stone querns, crushing grain kernel by kernel. Women's hands bled from the rough stones. Children missed playtime helping grind. A single family needed 4 to 5 hours of backbreaking labor just for daily bread. Many went hungry because grinding was simply too exhausting after long farm work. Why survival needed a solution? Grinding grain by hand was slowly killing medieval villagers. The constant strain destroyed joints and muscles. During harvest season, when grain was plentiful, people still starved because they couldn't process it fast enough. Hand grinding wasted precious daylight hours that should have been spent farming, defending villages, or raising children. Water mills helped some areas, but rivers froze in winter and dried up during droughts. Villages desperately needed reliable power that worked year-round, in any weather condition. The birth of windmills. Then came the windmill, a machine that captured the invisible power of wind and changed Europe forever. Dutch engineers around 1180 cracked the secret. Massive wooden sails that caught horizontal winds and transferred that energy downward through rotating shafts. These weren't small structures. Windmills towered 60 feet high, visible for miles across flat countryside. The first successful designs used 4 enormous canvas sails stretched across wooden frames, each sail larger than a ship's mainsail. When steady winds blew at 15–20 miles per hour, the entire mechanism came alive with creaking wood and spinning motion that would transform raw grain into life-sustaining flour within hours instead of days. How the blades worked. When wind pushed those giant sails, magic happened inside the windmill. The blades spun a heavy wooden shaft called the windshaft, which was connected to intricate gear systems that medieval craftsmen carved by hand. These weren't simple gears, they were masterpieces of engineering with wooden teeth cut to precise angles. The main gear wheel, called the brake wheel, had over 80 individual wooden teeth that meshed perfectly with a smaller gear called the wallower. This gear system was brilliant. It took the slow, powerful rotation of the windshaft and converted it into faster, controlled spinning motion. The gear ratio was typically 8:1, meaning for every 8 rotations of the wind-powered shaft, the grinding mechanism spun 64 times. This multiplication of rotational speed created the perfect grinding force needed to crush grain without destroying the flour's texture or nutritional value. The grinding stones. Those spinning gears rotated massive millstones stacked on top of each other, crushing grain into fine flour through sheer weight and friction. What once drained human strength for hours was now accomplished by nature's power in minutes. The grinding stones themselves were marvels. Each stone weighed up to 3,000 pounds, and was carved from special French limestone that stayed sharp for decades. The bottom stone, called the bedstone, remained stationary while the top runner stone spun at precisely controlled speeds. Between these stones, grain was crushed by tremendous pressure while grooves carved into the stone surfaces created air circulation that prevented overheating. The gap between stones could be adjusted with incredible precision. Too wide and flour stayed coarse. Too narrow, and friction created dangerous heat that could ignite grain dust. Master millers could judge perfect stone alignment by touch, sound, and even the smell of grinding grain. This process turned raw wheat into silky flour that baked into bread far superior to anything hand grinding could produce. The beating heart of villages. Soon, entire villages were built around windmills like medieval cities grew around cathedrals. These towering structures became the lifeline of entire communities. The first thing peasants saw every morning and the last thing they heard at night as wooden gears creaked in steady winds. Village layout centered on the windmill, houses clustered nearby for easy grain transport, roads led directly to the mill entrance, and markets formed around the base where fresh flour was sold daily. The miller's house sat adjacent to the mill for constant supervision. These machines required 24-hour attention during windy periods when grinding never stopped. Children grew up with the sound of spinning sails and grinding stones as their lullaby. The windmill's rhythm became the village heartbeat. Fast grinding during strong winds meant abundant flour and celebration, while calm days brought anxiety about diminishing food supplies. Travelers could navigate by windmill sounds heard for miles across open countryside. When a windmill stopped working, entire communities faced potential starvation, making the mill's health more important than any church, castle, or marketplace. The windmill truly was the beating heart that kept medieval villages alive. Feeding hundreds? One efficient windmill could process food for hundreds of people, transforming medieval nutrition and population growth across Europe. During optimal wind conditions, a single mill ground 1012 tons of grain daily, enough to feed 400 villagers with fresh bread, porridge, and grain-based meals that formed 70% of medieval diets. Bread, the absolute staple of medieval nutrition, became easier to produce than ever before in human history. Peasant families who once spent half their waking hours grinding grain could now bring a week's worth of wheat to the miller and receive enough flour for daily bread within a few hours. This efficiency meant villages could support larger populations without increasing agricultural land. More people meant stronger defense against raiders, more hands for harvest work, and greater economic diversity as some villagers could specialize in crafts instead of constant food preparation. The windmill's productivity also improved nutrition quality, MRC. Consistent fine grinding produced superior flour that baked into more digestible bread with better texture and taste. Villages with reliable windmill access grew faster and stronger than communities still dependent on hand grinding or unreliable watermills. Population records show that windmill villages often doubled in size within a generation of mill construction, demonstrating the direct connection between efficient food processing and community prosperity. More than just grain. Windmills weren't just for flour, they became Europe's first industrial multi-tool, powering diverse operations that revolutionized village economics and daily life beyond food processing. The same wind energy that ground wheat could power sawmills that turned logs into construction lumber for houses, bridges, and defensive walls. Oil mills pressed seeds into cooking oil and fuel for oil lamps that extended productive hours after sunset. Fulling mills cleaned and thickened wool cloth, transforming raw sheep fleece into weatherproof garments essential for surviving harsh winters. Some windmills pumped water from deep wells during droughts, operated bellows for blacksmith forges, or even powered early paper mills that supported the growing demand for written documents and expanding medieval trade networks. Smart village planning positioned different mill types strategically. Grain mills on the windiest hills for maximum power, sawmills near forests for easy lumber transport, and fulling mills close to sheep pastures where wool production centered. This diversification protected villages from economic disasters. If grain harvest failed, the community could still generate income from lumber sales, cloth production, or other windmill-powered industries. Villages with multiple windmill operations became regional economic centers that attracted merchants, craftsmen, and specialized workers, creating prosperity that extended far beyond simple survival needs. The windmill transformed from survival tool into economic engine. The social impact: peasants suddenly had more time for farming, trading, building defenses, and raising families as windmills freed them from endless grinding labor that had consumed their ancestors for centuries. This time liberation triggered massive social changes that reshaped medieval village life and community structure in ways that lasted for generations. Markets flourished around windmill sites as people had surplus time for crafts, trading, and social interaction that created vibrant economic communities. Villages grew stronger militarily because men could dedicate time to weapons, training, and fortification construction instead of grinding grain from dawn to dusk. Women gained time for textile work, childcare, food preparation beyond basic bread, and community organization that strengthened social bonds and cultural development. Children could attend church schools more regularly, learning, reading, and basic mathematics that elevated literacy rates in windmill villages compared to communities still trapped in hand-grinding routines. Seasonal festivals and religious celebrations became more elaborate as communities had energy for cultural activities beyond mere survival. Craftsmen specialized in pottery, metalworking, leather goods, and other trades that diversified village economies and attracted outside customers who brought new ideas and economic opportunities. Marriage patterns changed as young people had time for courtship and families could invest more energy in raising children rather than constant food processing. The windmill's social impact extended beyond productivity. It gave medieval people something previous generations never had: leisure time to build culture, community, and connections that made life worth living beyond daily survival. The dark side of power. Millers, 9. The men who controlled windmills wielded enormous power that often corrupted them into village tyrants who exploited hungry communities for personal profit and political control. These essential workers frequently cheated peasants through rigged scales that underweighed grain deliveries while overweighing flour payments, effectively stealing food from families who had no alternative processing options. Some dishonest millers mixed sawdust, chalk, sand, or other adulterants into flour to increase volume while reducing quality, creating bread that provided less nutrition, and sometimes caused illness in communities dependent on their services. Feudal lords recognized windmill monopolies as powerful control mechanisms and heavily taxed peasants for mill usage through systems called soak rights that forced entire villages to use specific mills regardless of service, quality, travel distance, or processing fees. These taxes could consume 10–15% of a family's total grain production, representing massive wealth transfer from struggling peasants to mill owners who often lived better than minor nobles. Miller corruption became so widespread that medieval legal records overflow with complaints about stolen grain, contaminated flour, excessive fees, and abuse of monopolistic power that left villagers with no recourse except expensive legal proceedings most couldn't afford. Some millers colluded with lords to artificially create grain shortages that drove up processing fees and bread prices, profiting from community hunger during difficult harvest years when people most needed fair treatment. The windmill that represented survival and progress also became a symbol of economic oppression that demonstrated how essential technologies could be weaponized against the very people they were supposed to serve. Symbol of survival. Despite corruption and exploitation, for ordinary peasants, the windmill remained a powerful symbol of hope and survival that represented humanity's ability to harness nature's forces for community benefit during history's harshest centuries. In times of famine, when crops failed and stored grain dwindled, a functioning windmill meant the difference between life and death for entire villages, as it could efficiently process whatever grain remained into life-sustaining flour. During brutal winters when rivers froze and water mills stopped operating, windmills continued grinding as long as cold winds blew, providing communities with consistent food processing capabilities when survival depended on maximizing nutrition from limited grain supplies. The sight of spinning windmill sails against winter skies gave peasants psychological comfort and practical assurance that their families would not starve as long as wind power remained available. Villages rallied around windmill maintenance and protection with fierce community loyalty because everyone understood that mill destruction meant collective death during food shortages or extended bad weather. Windmills also represented technological hope, proof that human ingenuity could solve seemingly impossible problems through clever engineering and cooperation with natural forces rather than brute human labor that exhausted people. Without solving fundamental challenges, children growing up around windmills learned that creativity and engineering could improve life conditions, inspiring innovations that gradually elevated medieval living standards beyond mere survival. The windmill became embedded in village identity and cultural memory as a symbol of progress, cooperation, and the possibility that life could improve through intelligent application of available resources. Even corrupted by human greed, the windmill itself remained a testament to human potential and communities' ability to thrive through shared technology and mutual dependence. History of windmills. In the Middle Ages, the windmill wasn't just a machine, it was survival, progress, and proof that human ingenuity could turn even invisible wind into life-sustaining power that transformed entire civilizations. These towering wooden giants represented humanity's first successful attempt to harness renewable energy on a scale that supported complex communities without depleting natural resources or requiring constant external inputs that many societies couldn't maintain. The windmill demonstrated that technology could serve people rather than enslaving them, freeing communities from exhausting labor that had limited human potential for centuries while providing reliable services that enhanced rather than replaced human capabilities and social cooperation. Medieval windmill success proved that sustainable development was possible through intelligent engineering that worked with natural forces rather than against environmental systems, creating prosperity that could last for generations without destroying the resources future communities would need for continued survival and growth. These innovations showed that decentralized, community-controlled technology could provide economic independence and food security more effectively than centralized systems, dependent on external control or resource supplies that might become unavailable during conflicts or natural disasters. The windmill legacy demonstrates that human creativity, when focused on solving real community problems through cooperation with natural systems, could create solutions that benefited everyone rather than concentrating power and wealth among privileged elites who controlled essential resources. Modern renewable energy advocates study medieval windmill communities as examples of successful sustainable development that supported growing populations while enhancing environmental health and social cooperation. The windmill proved that technology's highest purpose was enabling human communities to thrive sustainably within natural limits, creating prosperity that lifted everyone rather than exploiting resources and people for short-term gains that ultimately destroyed the foundations of long-term community survival and cultural development. Medieval windmills prove that simple technology can transform entire communities. These villages achieved food security and prosperity by working with nature instead of against it. Their success shows us that sustainable solutions have always been possible when human creativity meets community cooperation. Ready to discover more medieval innovations? Subscribe to Medieval Forge for fascinating insights into ancient wisdom that could change our modern world.